Why is it that entrepreneurs seem to have a predisposition for addiction?
I love this question. So, greatest strength, greatest weakness. High performers have an insatiable drive to be better, to be successful. And while some of that drive comes from a really healthy place, a lot of that drive comes from deep feelings of inadequacy.
What's up, and welcome back to the Living Vision Show. Today, I've got something really helpful for all of my high performers out there that may not have the best patterns, whether they're in business, in relationships, or at home. This conversation's a little bit raw, and I want to invite you to dig into this with me together with a very special guest. I've got Craig Perra here, and not only has he designed a system, a globally recognized framework for helping men to master their own self-leadership, which we'll talk about, but also transforming their, let's call them destructive habits or internal conflict. But Craig has gone through all of these patterns and pains himself. In this episode, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about why there's a very high ratio of performance people, high performance people, entrepreneurs, creatives, artists, and things like addiction, and why those patterns have such a gripping effect on people that are getting after it and chasing big dreams. Ambition and addiction are incredibly correlated. And more importantly than that correlation, Craig has some direct action items, some feedback, and some experience in how to dig yourself, dig myself out of those patterns. Now, this isn't just about addiction. So I don't want you to think that this episode is all about addiction if that's not what you're grappling with. This episode at a core is about patterns and whether or not the patterns that you have will take you to what you want. So this conversation at a core, and I want to invite you to this vulnerably, openly, and self-critically in some sense, so that you really take something away, is about whether or not the vision that you have for your future can exist with the patterns that you have today. This is a very special conversation. I'm so delighted to share it with you. Welcome to the show, Craig Perra. All right, Craig, welcome to the show. I'm so excited that you're here. We're like wrapping up this year. It's kind of end of year when we're recording. What's been a highlight from this year, whether it's personal or business? I'd love to just hear a highlight, and then we're going to dip right in.
Yeah, this has been the most significant personal development year of my life. I have to go back 15 years, when I hit rock bottom and tried to hurt myself at my lowest point with addiction and all the mental health challenges I was having. So yeah, we've never had more clarity around the business. I've never had more clarity around my vision and how I want to help people. And it just feels so good to be surrounded with people like you, other successful men and women who are thriving like us. It has made the journey so much more fun and exciting. And that's been the biggest shift for me, is the benefits of being in community.
I love that. Yeah, man, you need a village.
You need a village. Well, there's a saying in my world: the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. And that's one of those lessons that comes in layers. And it came in layers for me, because if you asked me in May, before I went to one of the first events I've attended in over a decade, are you connected? I would have said yes. I'm in Rotary Club. I talk to people every day. I love serving my clients. But does that mean there wasn't an opportunity to level up in that regard? There absolutely was, and I took it.
It's an interesting juxtaposition to have addiction on one side and connection on the other. I want to hear a little bit about your story, but let's just double click on that for a moment. When I think of connection as a method of being better, healing, of feeling like I'm on fire again, getting my spark back, I've got to be around the right people. So how do you think of connection and making sure that the connection's a positive one?
Yeah. So I think a connection, and measure the value of the connection, if you could do such a thing. One is their vulnerability within that connection. So I was really connected with a lot of people, but I'm in the driver's seat. I'm the boss. I'm in charge. I'm the coach. And I didn't have that vulnerability at a deeper level in my personal life. And I think that vulnerability and the accountability that comes from it and the purpose that comes from it is one of the most important things. And the reason why this quote, it's based on an old rat study where they gave the rats heroin. And then they gave the rats like this who were addicted to heroin in this playground. And the rats who were in the playground and were socialized and connecting with each other stopped using the heroin. The rats that were in the enclosed spaces continue to use the heroin. And so that study's been cited. Now, limitations in all these studies, but the general premise is that when, especially men, it tends to come easier for women, but we hide. And even some of the masterminds that I see a lot of people in, they're networking, they're negotiating as well. They should. That's what they're there for. They're there to grow their business, but they're getting a lot of good professional development and they're looking in the mirror, but they're not vulnerable. They're not sharing that deeper part of themselves, the imposter syndrome, the failure, the bad habits, the poor coping strategies, their wife going through menopause, the challenges that they're having in their life. So really, despite the illusion of connection, I find a lot of people are really disconnected from themselves, and that results in disconnections in their personal lives. And it's not a natural thing for us men. We're taught to stuff it down.
Yeah. So I want to dig into these coping mechanisms. I want to dig into things that we can do to navigate stress better. We got to start with your story. So you're working with individuals, often high performers, who are struggling with some kind of addiction, but this wasn't always your history. Walk us through, maybe give us like the Cliff Notes version of how this became your life and why this is so important to you.
Sure. So I like to say that I have been fired by some of America's finest companies. And there was a low point in my life, Aaron, where I was an executive as an attorney in $1 billion company, another $1 billion company, national responsibility running their compliance department. Before that, I practiced law as a litigator for 16 years. And I always had this huge conflict between what people saw on the outside and how I felt on the inside. And in fact, I think your greatest strengths are your greatest weaknesses. There's always a cost. And so my insatiable drive and inability to compartmentalize led to a lot of maladaptive behaviors because I didn't have the emotional intelligence to manage stress. I'm in this new job. I hate this job. I feel trapped. And what I had done my entire life, I had been addicted to heroin, Ritalin, alcohol, sex, drugs, work, the synthetic chemical bath salts, just to top things off, right? That's how low it got in the sabotage. And this has been patterns throughout my life. Breakdown in my 20s, breakdown in my early 30s, and then the late 40s was the doozy where I'm in this job with national responsibility. I'm not happy in my marriage. I'm projecting all of my shit onto my wife. And I felt hopeless in this job. I was acting out with prostitutes. I was using drugs. I was a disaster in what I was doing. Aaron, I realize it now that this part of me that was sabotaging was trying to set me free. Like I hated this life. I didn't want to do this. It wasn't, I didn't feel it in my bones that this is something I wanted to do. I burned the house down. And at that low point, I remember walking out. I was hospitalized for 3 days in a psychiatric facility, told to leave work. Work had me followed because I was so had one of those Chevy Chase Christmas scenes where I was just out of control. It was bad, man. It was really, really bad. But I came out of inpatient and I remember walking out and I said to myself, well, and this is after years and years of therapy, lots of processing, lots of talking about mom and dad, lots of talking about being groomed by the priest and the older neighborhood boy, a lot of that deep, deep trauma work, Aaron, but I never learned what to do about it. Like, how do I where does that go? And I've learned that talking about it has some benefit, but it doesn't by itself produce sustainable change. So at that low point, I said to myself, I am never coming back to this place. I don't care if I have to dedicate the rest of my life to self-help. I'm not doing it. I don't care if I make less money. I don't care if I'm a teacher. Like I didn't care. I just said, I'm going to fix this. And that led me on the journey to start learning about different modalities that wasn't rooted in 12 steps or wasn't rooted in the disease-based model of addiction. But I started to look at this lesson like I started to look at my problem like an executive and a leader looks at his problems. And I started asking myself, well, what systems do I need to build? Where are the greatest risks? And I remember when I was inpatient, Aaron, one of the guys was talking and said, does anybody here know anything about risk? And I remember sitting back in my chair and sighing. And I said to myself, if this guy says risk equals frequency times severity, I'm going to jump out the window. Like, I'm managing risk for $1 billion company. I know that. So I hit this low point, dedicated my life to self-help. And here I am 14 years working with some of the most successful men on the planet. Helping them turn. See, the thing about where you're distracted, where you're out of alignment, where you're addicted, that is the greatest leverage point for profound change because it reveals all your blind spots, all your weaknesses, all your wounds, all the lack of discipline, all the corrosive belief systems are all stuck in that bad habit and poor coping strategy and addiction. You know, we can look at it on a spectrum. And so that's been my obsession for the past 15 years.
Dude, there's so much wisdom coming in this podcast. I could tell. I have so many questions. What you said about the addiction puzzle showing you that you didn't want to do work, didn't want to be in this space, you don't want to be caught in this box, I think is a really interesting one to unpack. Because in order to recognize it, some part of you did not want to play a character or play a role or be caught in this machine. You had to be able to zoom out. And I don't know that many people are taught because we're not really conditioned to think this way. We just look at the behavior and say that's bad behavior. So don't stop the behavior versus, hey, why is the behavior? What are you trying to avoid with the behavior? Or what pain does this sort of dull for you? How did you learn to do it for you? And then how do you help people deal with it today so that they're taking the value of the avoidance or the mechanism or the addiction, not just trying to like Band-Aid it and cover it up?
Yeah. I love that question. So here's a statement that punched me in the face. It was break a habit, make a habit. Then it was the feed the right wolf story. And then it was all behavior is need-seeking behavior. All behavior is need-seeking behavior. And that's when I learned that my addict part that I had demonized, that I had diseasified, that quite frankly, if you asked me early on, like if you could, like if that part was in front of you, what would you do to that part? I'd pull out a gun and blow his heads off. I want him dead. I want him gone. I want this part of me. Well, guess what, man? That part of me has been protecting me from pain since I was a child. And so then you learn, okay, wait a minute. I read this, everyone here listening has heard the quote, there's no such thing as bad habits from a neuroscience perspective. I presume most of your listeners have heard that statement in a short form video somewhere or Andrew Huberman saying it. But what do you do about that? What do you do about that? How? And so what I did is I said, okay, well, if needs get met reactively or they get met proactively, what do I need to do? And that's the essence of self-leadership. Every major spiritual tradition has a center. Jungian psychology has a center. Gestalt psychology has a center. 12 steps has a higher power. The internal family systems model has the self. So what do I need to do to lead that part to protect me from pain, but do it in a way that actually brings value to my life, retrains the identity. So the addict part became my power, because my sexual energy is one of the most powerful forces in human nature. My liar part became integrity. My shame part became my moral compass. My critic part became quality control.
Wow.
Does that land?
Yeah.
It's kind of a little out there, but tell me if it's making
this is
sense.
good. And I think everyone should go back and listen to that string again. That's a really good way to think about reformulating the darker parts of our personality into strong parts of our personality. What
Inside your
tools?
cave is your inside your cave is your greatest treasure.
Always. And I'm a big believer
Always.
that you have to do really dark work, got to do some shadow work. You got to, whatever you want to call it, you have to look at these corners that are unexposed and figure out how to make them assets. What tools did you use to be able to reprogram some of those? Because those,
Yeah,
I think on the surface, we hear, go to talk therapy. We hear some different modalities, but
doesn't work.
this can be a long road for people.
Yeah. Is so the technique, and listen, this is a high performance technique. Olympians do it. There is data that says talking to yourself in the third person increases resiliency, increases resolve, increases better strategic thinking. I started talking to these parts, and I started to ask them questions like the addict part. Where did you come from? Well, do you remember when you were a child and that older boy invited you over and started touching you, and you felt so much religious shame that you didn't tell anybody and you went back for years? Like, do you remember the challenges that you had growing up at home when I was the safe place for you? When we look at that porn, when we, hide away, I made you feel better. I helped you numb, cope, and escape. I was trying to help. So in that dialogue, Aaron, a couple of things happen. One, you bring some structure to the conversation that everybody is having in their head anyway. That back and forth, that angel demon that we see in the cartoons when we were kids. So that conversation with this part strengthens that internal dialogue. It also introduces this frame of here's the part, or here's the vice president. Here's the direct report. I'm the CEO. That's the self, the center, the core, the higher power, the fingerprint of God, the opus Dei, Holy Spirit, the soul, whatever you want to call it. So by having those conversations, you put yourself in self-energy. You put yourself in a grounded place where you're now no longer, listen, that internal conflict, like we talked about, how do you operationalize the reality that there's no such thing as bad habits? How do you bring that to life? Parts work and self-leadership is a way to bring that to life. So when my wife calls me from the other room, and my first thought is, or was, not now, but was like, oh shit, what did I do now? Jesus Christ. Like, I'm trying to focus. Like, well, wait a minute. What's happening in that moment? That part is trying to protect me from getting blamed for something I didn't do. Trying to protect me from avoid conflict. Maybe I just won't go. The part is trying to protect me from pain. When you realize that, then you can protect yourself better in a way that's aligned with your identity and what you want your future self to be.
Magic, man. This is so good, dude. Just yesterday, I was having a hard time sleeping. I named my inner critic Bruce.
Yeah,
he has been my protector. He has been the most formidable protector I know. And he was loud. And I think part of this parts theory phase that I've gone through is being able to name my different parts and speak to them, which I love. And I find so much value in that. What I think entrepreneurs like myself have to deal with is this huge landscape of pressure, this undeniable desire for more, but then, we put a lot of weight on ourselves, and I have these manic moments where in my head there's a lot happening because there's so much happening externally that I'm managing. And then my stories seem to match my stress. So when stress is low, stories are quiet. When stress is high, stories are loud. And I'm still navigating some of these patterns, but I have found that the safest place for me to put them for the last 30 years, 20 years has been fitness. Like it was a good outlet, right? Yes. It was a healthy outlet, but anything can overcorrect. How does overcorrection fit into this puzzle? Cause I think if I look at my fitness pattern, there have been times where I got really, really fit and I pursue a marathon and that felt like a great outlet and there was healthiness in it. Yes. But I think naturally guys like me and guys like you, like we overdo everything. Entrepreneurs overdo everything. We pursue it to its like extreme. How does that fit into this equation? Is that an addiction? Is it not an addiction?
Well, it's what I'll say what it produces. It results in suppression. That overcorrection results in suppression. So say, for example, I've got this brutal critic. I'm going to exercise the shit out of it so that voice stops talking. But the reality is your critic is such a beautiful part of you, Aaron. You would not have achieved the success that you've achieved. You would not have the relationships you would achieve. You would not be the role model in your community that you've become if it wasn't for this critic. So here's a quote that really I love, and I don't know if you'll connect with it, but it's from a poem by Kathy Seal. And the quote is, "When is a monster not a monster? When you love it." When you love it. So if you're overcorrecting on the fitness, you may be suppressing that very important, beautiful, critical, like that's the part that can find the problems in anything. His mind is always racing and helping you solve problems, reminding you of what you didn't do, what you said you were going to do. You need that part. You cannot function without that part. Without that part, you'd be probably pretty mediocre. No offense. That part is a gift. And so when you change your relationship with that part, when you see these parts as allies, when you understand, now listen, there's a process in understanding their role, understanding where they came from, their triggers, their thoughts, how it feels in the body and what to do about it. But when you see that, here's another example, right? So many people come to me with deep, deep, deep shame. Deep, deep, deep shame. And I think a lot of people expect me to say, well, shame is bad. Guilt is good. Shame means you are bad. Guilt means you did something bad. That's good. That's helpful. And if people connect with that, go for it. Then I ask them, what would your life look like if you had no shame? Oh, fuck. No shame? Whoo, Sodom and Gomorrah. Excess. Overcorrection. Like it would be a crash and burn.
Right. You'd go shame, far to the other side.
Far to the other side, and you're suppressing. Shame is an evolutionary trait. Evolutionary biologists talk about it, that has evolved to protect us and to keep us in the tribe so we don't get abandoned or we don't get rejected, because at one point in our evolutionary history, that meant death. So you've got this primary, deep evolutionary force that's trying to protect you. It becomes, when you do the work, your moral compass. It becomes a source of strength. Your ethos, your identity, your values are all in shame. But if you look at it, bad, I want to get rid of shame, it doesn't work like that, because that which you resist persists.
Love that, dude. What I'm hearing, maybe inferring through some of this, is that the label addiction is a sticker that we put on something very extreme, but all of us are navigating coping mechanisms, right? Whether it's as extreme as addiction and it's as pervasive as addiction, or it's still minuscule, we're likely to do this to avoid pain, And in assessing myself as I'm listening to you talk, part of what the last couple of years has taught me where there has been difficulty is how to navigate pain, how to appropriately find times to not manage it. Like, this is too much. I can't manage it right now. Let me find an outlet, and then I'm going to come back to this. How to process, how to poke at it, how to discover it, how to play with it. But underneath all of this, it sounds like pain is a really important relationship that we have to have. Like, we have to be good enough to know when is too much. We have to be good enough to know when we can handle it and how to handle it. And then we also have to not run from it. Would you say that addiction is driven by pain? And then if so, how do we build a better relationship with pain so that we're not driven by it?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Pain, fear. And here's the thing. There are people in this world who can't experience pain. They live terrible lives. They live terrible lives, and most of them don't live very long because they don't have the protective mechanisms to protect their body. They don't feel it. They don't feel things like we do. Pain is a gift, and I know that is a tough thing to say, but I'm saying it from the perspective as someone who has been in 7 car accidents, 6 concussions, fractured skull, low back surgery, jaw surgery, misdiagnosed with Crohn's disease, chronic inflammatory condition. I've had some serious problems, man, over the years, and I'm on deck for a neck surgery that I've been successfully avoiding and a hip surgery that I've been successfully avoiding because this work forces you to change your relationship with pain. And when I tell you physically, it changes your relationship with subjective physical pain. We have far more control to self-regulate at a deeper level when you understand. So some of my deepest work, Aaron, was around my pain. And I asked myself, okay, what value might it have given me? And I was like, again, addicted to heroin. First it started with pain pills. Like, I was miserable. And I learned that this whole no pain, no gain mantra that a lot of us get as kids, pain meant significance. It meant sacrifice. It meant bravery. It meant attention. It meant validation. And there were times in my childhood where I got the most attention when I was in pain. So for everyone who's struggling with physical pain, and I think physical and emotional is the same thing, but please know that you have the incredible capacity to change your relationship with it. It has been documented. The evidence is clear. And if you can impact it a little bit, you can impact it a lot of it. And what the result is a regulated, grounded, self-led human that is way more proactive than they are reactive because you've developed the capacity to sit in the discomfort. I like to grossly oversimplify self-growth, doing something about your problem and being able to sit in the discomfort of the problem. And you've probably seen some of the research recently around being bored and how important bored is. Because of our technological society, people aren't anymore. Well, it's screwing up your brain and it's impacting your performance because you have to escape from the discomfort. One of my favorite exercises is guys in a hotel room. He's traveling for work. Just sit on the bed and do nothing for 10 minutes. Just do nothing. It's like one of my favorite exercises, and it drives them crazy, drives them nuts. Like, they might be able to relax for 10 minutes without thinking about it. But when you frame it from, hey, we're going to practice being bored, this is when the demons come, the voices come, the triggers come.
Yeah. The relationship I had with no pain, no gain started with athletics.
Yes, me too.
And I'm hyper mindful of how dangerous it is. And I remember doing a lot of math. Math was something that came really easy to me. So in math equations, right, you could just slash things off of both sides of the equals. So if you have like 2 times X and 2 times X, well, now X is X, right? Nice and easy. So you could just divide and manipulate the math equation. And we could take the no off of both sides and then say, all right, well, then your philosophy, my philosophy is pain equals gain. And man, the relationship that I built there was really dangerous. And I think that not only in athletics, but we do this in relationships. I think we do it in interpersonal dynamics,
the grind
business.
for work, right?
Yeah, it's like hustle porn, hustle culture is so aggressive about this. And what I've started to recognize is that I've solved some of the topsoil layers of pain equals gain and how to reframe that. But there still is this inner mechanism that drives a lot of my inner workings as an entrepreneur, right? Sacrifice and struggle can be a part of it. But the point is to have something that you're working towards. And if struggle comes along, you're capable. But I think that it's easy to get kind of attracted to struggle as this indicator that we're doing something good. And there's plenty of quotes that I see floating around this idea that if it's hard, it's good for you.
Right.
And where I've had to steer the most and be most attuned and get the most help and really dig is in a pattern of just doing hard things, not really having a reason for doing hard things, but thinking that hard things are automatically and somehow intrinsically good for you. Is that part of the puzzle? Is figuring out how to let go of those things?
No, I think it's a huge part of the puzzle because within that puzzle represents so many of the self-destructive behaviors that we ultimately lead to numb, cope, and escape from. So if you have this internal framework of there being this center that you can access within the chaos, your relationship with pain changes. Your relationship with these bad habits change. You're not making decisions from a place of denial. You're making identity-based decisions honoring your future self. And there's a very, very big difference. And that's, a lot of high performers struggle in 12 steps because there's a lot of resistance. You go into the meetings, people talk about they slip, they almost slip. There's a lot of focus on the problem. And if we ran our businesses like that, we'd both be broke.
Yeah, you never make it out.
You need the risk management, but you can't let risk management run the company. You won't get anything done.
I've recently, this came up a couple times with clients in various different capacities, but we've talked about habits as a tool. And I'm a big believer that you can't delete a habit. You can replace a habit, you can shift a habit, you can identify what it is and then retool it, but you don't just like delete something and then there's a vacuum, because nothing can exist in a vacuum, right? It's like, don't think of an elephant. Like, you obviously think of an elephant.
Yes.
So instead of trying to rewire myself to say, all right, I'm going to delete this bad habit, or I'm going to wake up earlier and like, I'm just going to fix all these bad things. What people have counseled me on is to say, Aaron, what's the identity that you want to have? What's the pattern, the habit, the hack that you want to have? And let's start steering the energy into that for a solution rather than to focus on just resolving the problem. But, as we're all pursuing all of these things, that list can be huge. Like, I feel like my list is huge for all these personal things that I want to shift into this better habit state, or these patterns that I want to get rid of. And I've had a hard time identifying where to start. And I think finding help has been really important, whether it's therapy or EMDR or plant medicine or a variety of things. But underneath all that is I think an important question to ask you. And that's, if we have these tendencies, how do we identify the most crippling ones and maybe focus on them and let the other ones just exist while we work on ourselves? How do we know what's really in need of dire attention and effort right now?
Yeah. The more I started to work with professional athletes and professional coaches, Aaron, which I've had the great privilege to do, I'd ask them a lot of questions. And what I saw was alignment in the work that they did, and the work that I did was around ridiculously attainable goals, Kaizen goals. So to answer your question, Where are you most out of alignment with your future self? Which habits are causing the most distress in your life and in your relationship? That's one place to start. Look at it from a risk management perspective, just like you would do, if you had a fractional chief compliance officer. Okay, where are the problems, right? What's causing the most damage? And the problem that I think most people have, that therapy is great to talk about it. You learn about the origin, make new habits, create goals, have accountability. I think, though, that most people's fundamental operating system is flawed because they don't have this self-leadership perspective, and they're not honoring and respecting these parts because they're still using bad habit language, and they haven't yet uncorked the power of self-leadership with this evidence-based psychological framework, which, by the way, is aligned with leadership theory. There's one person at the top. There's few exceptions to that rule, but there's, almost all of it, that center, that core. And when you start leading those parts, not seeing them as bad, but trying to understand what needs they're trying to meet, I believe that framework, and I've seen it, changes everything, because you now have got a foundational psychological alignment, a psychological model that is in alignment with human behavior. And everyone listening has said to themselves, gosh, I hate that part of myself. Who's hating? What's the part, and who's doing the hating?
Man, this is so good. Why is it that entrepreneurs seem to have a predisposition for addiction? What is it about high performers?
I love this question. So, greatest strength, greatest weakness. High performers have an insatiable drive to be better, to be successful. And while some of that drive comes from a really healthy place, a lot of that drive comes from deep feelings of inadequacy. So I'm going to raise my hand and say guilty. And listen, it's okay, right? Being significant is a core human need. It is what I think is, especially in working with men, one of their needs, beyond the physiological ones, like the primary need. Even sometimes when they take the test and it's love and connection, it's the significance they get from the love and connection. And so, what was the bring me back on track, Aaron? Oh, why? Yeah. Why? So part of that driver is that innate sense of inadequacy. And I got to tell you, every client that I've had the privilege to work with, and there's now been 1,000 plus over the past 14 years, the common denominator for the professional athlete, for the famous mogul, for the hedge fund guy, for the guy who sits with heads of state, lack of love for self. And I know that's not very high performance language. And I know lack of self-leadership. I could say it 10 different ways that might resonate. So you've got that inherent drive, which has produced so much success, but that's the pain that we have to escape from. And number two is leaders have an incredible ability to compartmentalize. There can be a fire over here, but if you're here on this Zoom call, you are locked in. You're engaging in a business strategy that your employees should not know about. You're able to lie about, or not meant, that you're able to compartmentalize. It is a natural talent of people who are very, very, very successful. That same ability to compartmentalize strengthens the parts. They're fractured. Those fractures are deeper. It's a great skill. And what happens, I think about it like a steel drum, Aaron. And listen, they're able to stuff all their problems. They could be poor relationship with their kids, wife ready to leave them, boardroom on fire. but eventually the cracks in that steel drum start to leak. And that imposter syndrome, that voice grows louder, the poor coping strategies have more frequency and maybe even more severity in terms of where they're headed with what they're doing. And their ability to keep those secrets is a function of their ability to compartmentalize in fear of being rejected and abandoned, rooted in that innate drive to be successful.
So one natural thought that comes up for me is, all right, well, the steel drum is leaking, then patch it up or bust it open and let's just deal with it. But compartmentalization can also be this superpower that most of these guys and I don't want to give that up. And what I've kind of heard is, as we've talked today, and I know this from my own work, but I want to dig into it a little bit with you, is that we're not trying to take away the superpower. There's a different agenda here. What's your perspective on how we want to keep the superpower, but also start to navigate the weakness?
Well, think how you lead. Okay, so I'm in charge of a whole bunch of people, and someone on my team made a mistake, and I treat them the way I used to treat myself. You piece of shit. Are you kidding me? How could you be so stupid? How could you make this mistake? So there's this perception that this is going to make me soft. No, it's going to align your internal leadership system with the way you know you need to lead outside. It has to be positive reinforcement. If it's not positive reinforcement, except in the military and the surgical theater, there are exceptions to that rule, but not in business. So not only does it not make you softer, it makes you stronger, because these parts that were once self-destructive have been retrained, have a new identity. And again, back to that, in alignment with your future self, a lot of science around that and that core. So it makes you stronger. So you don't want to get rid of the ability to compartmentalize. You don't want to get rid of that critic. Are you crazy? You want to get rid of your critic? There's no fucking way I'm on this podcast with you, working with a client who just sat with someone so famous, I can't tell you because it's in the news, without that critic. I love that critic. And when he gets loud and he starts barking, go in the hot tub, take a breath, but it's never rejecting that part. It's like, what do you need right now? You feel bad because you said the wrong thing with Aaron and you felt stupid and you shouldn't have done that. Okay, but I think most of it was good. What do you think? Do you think, so that conversation changes not just the dynamic, but the internal way the body is experiencing reality. I mean, I know that's a bold claim, but I believe it in all my heart, and it's true.
Man, one of the hardest things I've had to ask myself is, what do you need? And I place no blame on like parents or school or teachers, but I don't know that I heard that a lot growing up. And this was 35 years ago, so it also wasn't nearly as common to ask that kind of question, right? We just kind of evolved. I think this emotional growth in the society that we're in now has been rather prolific, generation to generation. And asking that question has been really difficult because there are times where I'm like, I don't know. I have no idea what I need. But I think that question has also created these moments where I'm like, well, now that I ask, it's actually a really simple fix. But my solution before might be an hour-long experience, right? It might be, I'll give you a concrete example. One time I was really stressed out and I'm like, man, I'm going to go have a drink. I'm going to go sit at the bar and like, I'm just going to kind of be around people. Like I just like to be around people. So I'm just going to go sit. And I sat here before I left and I was like, Aaron, what do you need right now? And man, the most fascinating thing happened. I had this whole dialogue in my head. I'm like, all right, what I really need right now is I need someone to validate that I had a stressful week and probably going to be just fine. Like that's what I needed. So my plan was to go sit at a bar and, get an old fashioned and just kind of sit for a bit and talk to a stranger that could never do that for me. Well, I mean, maybe they would have said that, but I doubt a bartender would have been like, man, you look really stressed, but you're going to be okay. And I sat here for long enough to walk that conversation through, and I was like, I don't need to go to the bar. But it started from this question of like, what do you need right now?
Yeah.
And I didn't go out. I just stayed at home. And I think that was a moment for me where I realized that I could walk through some of the needs that I had that felt very scattered previously. And I could just be in that moment really uncomfortably. And I learned a lot in that one moment, and then I could kind of multiply it. And when I think of future Aaron, and I think of some of these patterns, these habits, like an identity is nothing more than a sequence of patterns that we don't have to think about. But it is hard to originate those patterns. Like the first one of those was really difficult. Now I feel much more capable of doing it. How do you work with guys to help them start the new pattern? Because doing the pattern, once you've done it, is way easier.
Yeah. So I love that question. Great question. So let's start with the premise that all behavior is need-seeking behavior. And we, particularly men, our needs when we were children were feminized. If I express my needs as a child, my buddies, and I'm just going to use the offensive word on purpose, start being a fag, right? Some of the worst slurs were thrown at young boys who expressed what they actually needed. And for good reason. We got to toughen up. We can't, be melt down. Like, not saying it's bad, but there's a cost. There's a cost. And so the best answers that I've got to that question and how I help people identify those needs is when we do the voice dialogue, when we start connecting with those parts, we first ask the question, where did you come from? Why is it that when I stumble on the sidewalk and almost spill the coffee I was carrying, the first thought in my head is, you stupid piece of shit? Where did you come from? Oh shit, man. That's what my mother used to call me when she was having a breakdown. So a lot of those, the more automatic, the more instantaneous the thought is, the greater the chance it goes back to some childhood programming. So you look at, addict, where did you come from? Anger, where did you come from? These parts are all protecting us. And by understanding, this is where, I love therapy. I think everybody should do therapy. But my problem was, what do I do with that? Where do I put that trauma, that pain, that suffering? Well, now I've got a container to put it in. This part that I used to call addict, I now call my power. This is where he came from. And so knowing where he came from, now I've got a much better understanding of the needs that I have in order to emotionally regulate and stay in my power.
Dude, love. I'll just comment on this. Like, I think therapy is a shovel and it helps you dig the things up. But especially for our ambitious individuals that are tuned in, I think coaching is the hammer that helps you build and construct with it. And I have not found that therapy alone can help me through some of these build outs, these internal identity architectures. So I very much align with that. Dude, man. Okay. Let's do one more question and then we'll kind of taper this thing down. What stands out to me is that, so we've architected addiction, where it comes from, how to think about it differently, how to build new patterns. We've really architected all of that. Thing I'd like to end with is, how do we reach, you and I, how do we reach someone that won't tell us, doesn't really need, it's not visible anywhere, but needs some kind of work so that they can be better? It isn't about them, like something isn't wrong maybe, but the thing that they're grappling with or struggling with, or the cover up, or the need that isn't being met in a healthy way is not super damaging, right? It's like, right. It's not that bad. How do we reach that guy, and what message would you have for him?
That's a really good question, because it's easy to reach that guy when he's at a low point.
Yeah, when it's fucked.
You've heard one of our colleagues and friends, Nico, talks about distractions, and one distraction costs 21 or 2 minutes focus time, according to a study from UC Irvine. So the best thing that you can do is be there for somebody, share your struggles, drop a line, like that every now and then, because it's probably worse than you think. Like, and expect, you can have a highly successful leader and be a little out of alignment. And you could have your average Joe be a lot of out of alignment, but that little bit out of alignment is causing more damage to the leader because of his responsibilities, because of what his goal, his vision, his influence. Those ripples are a lot more. And, that's been part of my mission, is saying, hey, I got a good idea. Let's not wait till it gets over here. Like how far are you out of alignment? What are the dopamine habits you're struggling with? Where are you most reactive? Is that something that you want to work on? But I will acknowledge it's a tough thing to do, especially for men. We don't solve our personal problems until a low point. However, and what my mission is with Mindful Habit Mastery, I'm trying to approach this from the perspective that, hey, this is causing, there is a significant cost here. Let's explore that cost. Let's look at where you are out of alignment, out of character, where those coping strategies are, where are you most reactive? And by the end of that call, we've got a list of like, yeah, I do snap at my kids. I have resentment for my wife. Oh God, a little too much time on social media, drinking 4 times a week, watching porn every night when the wife goes to bed. So like the aggregate of those little things, in my experience, when I get on the phone with guys, and these are their words, is having a massive impact. So I don't know if I gave you the answer, but maybe some framing and some ways to talk about it easier. But, that's what I've been trying to do, Aaron. And it's, when people get it, when they see it, like if they looked at their life like a business problem, if your business had that many leaks, you would not tolerate it. It would be unacceptable for that many leaks in cash flow, that many leaks in personal profit. There'd be no fucking way you would let that happen in your business. You couldn't do it. It'd be irresponsible, possibly violating a fiduciary duty. Like you wouldn't do it. So anyway, hope that helps.
It's a good call out. I find that the most dangerous thing I've ever said, and I push this philosophy pretty aggressively with friends and with family, the most dangerous thing I have ever said is it's not that bad.
Right.
And if you are saying that, you are already in a place where it is that bad, because you would not need to say that.
Right.
So if you're listening and you're caught up in habits, you're caught up in patterns that aren't taking you where you want to go, I highly recommend you lean on Craig for everything that he's built and is doing. There's an obvious sense of passion for this. But Craig, I actually think that your real gift is you wear your heart on your sleeve and your experience on your sleeve so that you can navigate somebody else through it. And I very much appreciate the transparency that you bring to this. It's remarkable to hear you talk about it, because often these things are held behind like scientific doors.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, this is what it should be versus this is what it was for me. And I think we are all made better when we can say, look, the reason I can help you is because I had to help myself.
And thank you, man. That means so much. It's a major part of my mission, is creating that safe place to talk about not just fucked up shit. Yeah, that too. But that, again, is there such a thing as a small integrity problem? Fuck no, man. I got fired for telling a stupid white lie to my boss about something trivial. It's nothing trivial in the office of the general counsel. Nothing trivial about us as leaders. There's no small integrity problem. So anyway, that's what I'm feeling.
I think in connection to this idea of vision, it also is important that we address the cracks on the way there. And so I very much value this conversation, and it might, if you're listening and it doesn't feel obvious as to why this work and what Craig is doing is so meaningful, I'll drop you with this just to close things out. if we build a vision of what your business looks like, what it produces, what your relationships are, what your adventure looks like, the way you use your day to day, your schedule, your calendar, and the way your health looks, spiritual, mental, emotional, physical, what we would be designing is this beautiful picture of everything optimized, right? There's no reason you wouldn't optimize it. So when we build this vision and then we strategically work back, what we look for is, okay, well, if we want to get to letter Z and you're at letter A, let's figure out how we get moving towards letter B. And more often than not, I think the address that is common in client relationships that I see is that addressing the leaks is more important than building for growth first.
Yes.
So you can build for growth. And I think building a big vision is important to build for growth, but we have to address some of these leaks because a small leak, when put under the stress of building for growth, will eventually explode. And I think for all of us, we're looking at people that are performing and fighting and grappling and believing and settling and pushing. And when you start to address some of these lack of integrity issues or patterns that are suffocating you or just really are pulling away from you so that you're not aligned with where you're going, the growth can happen really easily. And for those of you that might still feel like you're fighting, alignment isn't like a woo-woo concept. It's really about these patterns and making sure they're steering you to where you want to go. So I would invite you to reach out to Craig. Craig, where can people find you?
Sure. You can visit me on the web at Mindful Habit Mastery, and I'll give you the links for the social media channels. You can put down there in the comments, but mindfulhabitmastery.com is our website, and you can reach me there.
I cannot impress enough how important this is. I've not lost any friends to major addictions. I've had friends go through patterns that are certainly unhealthy, and I've had to step into a lot of them. And I would willingly do that for anybody listening or anybody tuned in or anybody that is in my circle. But I hope that you can also do that for yourself, right? That you can self-advocate and you can get in motion with change. And I know that all of us want growth, but how many of us will really go headstrong into change? And to me, that's really the question of courage and bravery, because it does take courage. Craig, I'm sure you can advocate. It takes a lot of courage to be like, hey man, I can't do it on my own, or I want some. Well, you don't even have to say you can't do it on your own. Like, I just want help.
Yeah.
But there's nothing wrong with asking
You'd
for help.
hire an expert in your business, right? People would spend, there's a client who they're marketing $1 million on a big marketing project for 2026, like a finalized, like kind of last minute. That's an easy expense. But, if the, like your point is that one, you'll always lose in a fight against yourself. And if that foundational system is broken, all that self-help work that you do, all that growth work that you do, all that leadership training that you do is built on a broken foundation. And that's what I help fix. So thank you, Aaron.
Get your floor right. Talk to Craig. Craig, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for dropping wisdom. If you like this episode, be sure to give us a review on Apple or Spotify. Really appreciate those things. Share it with a friend that might need this. You don't have to tell them what it's about, but they may be okay listening to direct feedback from you if you care about them and they know that. So share this episode out. Make sure you follow Craig. And if you need some direct help from him, you know where to find him. I appreciate you being here. Let's make this year coming up a really good one and work on those patterns. I'll see you on the next episode.